Hello, good morning, good evening. Hi, Georgia. It's been a long time since we've last seen live each other. And I'd like to thank you very much for this invitation. I'm super excited to share our experience in our office that we have been working now for 20 years in collective housing. So I hope you'll enjoy this talk and we can discuss it anytime soon. So I'll just share the screen. I'll start. All right. So the title of the presentation is Housing, Spatial, Social and Material. So I'd like to talk about collective housing and something about individual housing as well through these three specific topics. I'm going to show you a little introduction to speak about the context and the focus we follow up in our office. And then I'll show you two research projects. One very old one from 20 years ago, our master thesis in London when we were studying at the AA, the Negotiate My Boundary, and the other one a little bit more recent, a home at Arsenale research project that we did as a pavilion of Slovenia in Venice 2016. Then I'll focus to three build projects that we have realized, and I'll end up with a note on how maybe individual can also become collective and a conclusion. So we are a very small or relatively small office from Ljubljana, Slovenia, and we mostly work here locally, although we have a couple of small projects also abroad. Tina and I are running the office for the past 20 years, and we are kind of intertwining three different areas. Besides practice, we're also teaching, and we are conducting research in parallel to what we do in our office, or kind of combined between teaching and practice. Tina is teaching in TU Wien, and I'm running a visiting school every summer for the past 10 years. So our career, in a way, started in 2003, and as you see on this diagram, we have started to build very early in our lives, in our careers, coming back from the AA from London back to Slovenia, where there was a lot of opportunities to actually start engaging into build architecture. But in parallel, we always were addressing different research topics, and also we were teaching through different institutions in order to keep our thinking fresh and to kind of go into depth in certain areas to fuel our practice with fresh ideas and understanding of what is important in architecture. So a little bit about the context of where we live in. Slovenia, it's a very small country in the middle of Europe. So here you have a map or a diagram of what is a 5-hour drive from Ljubljana, which is the center in the country. And that more or less defines our cultural milieu. Historically and culturally, we were part of Roman Empire. We were part of Venetian Republic, Illyrian provinces of Napoleon. We were also part of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and also for 60 years after the Second World War, we were part of Yugoslavia. So we have all these kind of layers, sediments, which are part of our environment, and this is in a way what also defines us. So Slovenia is contextually very, very diverse. It spans from Mediterranean to Alps, although it occupies very small territory. And in the one of the interviews in Detail magazine, we stressed that our output varies considerably in appearance because our conceptually developed projects are responding in a very specific and special way to respective contexts from where they are built. So if you see a picture portfolio of our office, you'll see a very diverse formal and visual approach, precisely because each building responds to its context, and it also responds to the people who are occupying these buildings, and they inform how these buildings are shaped and designed. But we take the sketch as the tool of thinking. So the process of thinking, we like to think, is always the same. It is always questioning in a similar way, in a similar kind of research way of what is the task at hand, what is important, and how that can be solved in a design piece. So sketch is a tool of thinking for us, but the same way physical modeling is the tool of discussion. With physical models, we are testing out options and variations that can be discussed within the team, in the office, but also with clients or maybe even public on a larger scale. So both these tools are very important for development of a project. So another thing which we like to stress, what is important for us in the office, is the materiality. Architecture is a discipline characterized by materials, and very early on in projects where you start thinking about them, with grasping the first concepts, we like to bring the discussion of materials on the table. In that way, the materials are playing quite an important role also in finalized outputs, finalized products, where we like to explore the possibilities that materials are actually giving us and to expose their specific characters. So user, it's an important part of architecture because architecture is experience, and our buildings, they heavily rely to what users are specifying at the beginning of what they want from those buildings to be. Sometimes it's easy to kind of address a small group of users or one user in order to understand what it is, but sometimes we have to run scenarios in order to understand a larger user group, in order to kind of embed those understandings into a building design. I'd like to also share with you a little bit of architectural legacy that we have in Slovenia. This is a family tree. Jože Plečnik, that you might know as a father of Slovenian architecture, very big influence, but then also the generation of Edvard Ravnikar and his students or co-workers who have very thoroughly defined the 60s of Slovenian architecture. So in Slovenia, we have modernism, which is very, very strong and kind of, very strong built mass of architecture that defines, in a way, our environment, but also defines, I believe, us as architects. So just a few examples. This is a University National Library from Plečnik, iconic building. It owes its character back to Wagner, who was Plečnik's teacher, but also back to Semper and the theory of materials that he wrote in a book. So all this kind of genealogy from Vienna, where Plečnik was studying, kind of was translated to Plečnik's works, and he was implanting this into his works in Ljubljana, which defined also other generation of architects, and I believe at the end also us as we are working now. So the next one is from Edvard Ravnikar, the Square of the Republic Towers. where you see maybe this language of textile that has been kind of transformed, or transformed from Semper to Wagner to Plečnik to Ravnikar. You see on this facade, which is kind of curtain facade clad with stone, but it kind of performs as a textile which kind of wrap around and uncurtain the windows that are kind of showing up in this tower. Yeah, I was speaking about Otto Wagner, who it's a Viennese architect, but has quite an influence on that generation of architects that I'm showing now. Here you see the Vienna Postsparkasse with stone, which is again kind of shaped in a form that kind of resembles textile coming down, and then the attachments are generating another texture level on the facade, with this kind of bolts being shown on the stone as it was kind of pinned to the building. So another set of interesting examples is here the architect Otto Njugovec, where he used a prefabricated trusses for building bridges and to create a holiday home in alpine environment, combining modern and traditional vernacular language of architecture. Or maybe this example again of Otto Njugovec, which is just a roof over some Roman remains, archaeological remains, that it is clearly a modern idea, but realized exclusively out of vernacular elements. So the roof and the hay on the roof, it belongs to a vernacular language, but the whole structural setup, it's absolutely part of the modern thought. Or maybe Stanko Kristel, who was a modernist, but the person who brought humanism into modernism. So he was very much studying how we humans behave and how we psychologically perceive the spaces, and he kind of included this in creating his buildings for people. So here we see the kindergarten, who is kind of scaled down to fit the kids' world, which is smaller in scale as the grown-ups world. And the last example of Stanko Kristel is where he emphasized the authority of structure. So structure in a way translates directly to architecture. So ground floor, this is a collective housing block, ground floor public, with a structure which is kind of open floor, but then a slab, rigid slab of some concrete eye trusses that create another platform. That the structure completely changes for the first floor and up, where there are individual flats in a collective housing setup. So that's about the architectural legacy, and let's move on Negotiate My Boundary, master thesis that we've done in London in the beginning of 2000s, where we worked on a project which was trying to question what is the collective housing today, and under the premise that the society is changing, then also the collective housing has to kind of follow up and change how it works. We did this as a collective work, as a master thesis, and then at the end it was published in a book by AA Publications, as you see it here. So that's a diagram of the whole process that we were running through for a year and a half. We were studying agronomic systems, territorial systems, we were studying social scenarios, responsive environments, and we kind of created certain approaches or tools in order to kind of create spaces, and we called our approach to design a hyper-attached system in order to kind of create a collective housing neighborhood in the middle of London. We have started analyzing Unité d'Habitation from Le Corbusier, the one from Marseille, in order to understand that these two units, interlocked units with a corridor in between, it's a system that allows quite a lot of diversity. So we analyzed the whole block. We understood that there is quite a few different flat typologies, not just the one that Le Corbusier always shows in his diagram, which we saw before, very popular. But we understood how those units are interlocked and how they actually perform in a very different way the different human needs. So from a very small flat to very big units as well. So here we have a diagram of all different unit types and how they compound together in Unité d'Habitation. But what we were kind of interested is how, from this research, how the two units are kind of interlocking together, and what are the possibilities that kind of arise from having two neighboring units together, and what is in between. So is the between just a wall? Is it between space? Is it something that we can share, and so on? So with this, we kind of made different iterations of how two units could possibly interlock further on. We made a matrix on all the possibilities with a certain kind of step of change. But we also started to analyze what are these territorializing devices. So what is in between different rooms even. So either those territorializing devices are integrated, or they are maybe kind of transformable. We also we looked at the furniture, which we kind of categorized as non-integrated and ultra-transformable, that you see on the left, or ultra-integrated and untransformable, but part of architectural envelope or mass. So the next thing we understood is that we can split up our activities. Well, first, we shouldn't speak about rooms in the context of living, but we should speak about activities. And we grouped three different types of activities: essentials, which are essentials for living; extras, which make kind of life interesting; and services. So on this diagram, you see this division of activities through these three categories, but also in relation to the ergonomics of the human body. So you can either stand, sit, or lay down. So with this understanding, we went back to the Unité d'Habitation. We took the floor plan of Le Corbusier, and we mapped the floor plan of where each activities are being performed and how much space they really need in height to perform those activities. So we understood in the end that the floor and the ceiling can be challenged. They are not necessarily always flat surfaces. So we came up to this this kind of conceptual section where we show this understanding of activities being related to the ergonomics of the human body and how those surfaces can interact and provide different spaces for humans to occupy. So the next really important thing was social scenario, to understand how the society has changed. And 20 years ago, the trends were similar as today, but now are even more emphasized. So most of the households are small households, maybe for one or two person. There is increase of elderly population. In 2000, there was 21% of total population were elderly. Then we understood that nuclear families still dominate the situation, but maybe there are less and less. But there are also in an increase the single parent families or different kind of ways how people are living together. So we understood from there that you can make your own home public, and that you can also share your home, and that you don't need to own everything. You can maybe rent the service, the service, or you can offer a service to somebody within your housing community. So we understood there is this notion of sharing, which is strong potential, and sharing also brings negotiation. So we started to understand that there could be autonomous units or non-autonomous units, so kind of dependent on other units, and trying to kind of map the social situation of a certain group of people that we kind of extracted out from lifestyle magazines, like real people trying to kind of run scenarios of how they would work or live together. We created those diagrams that represent social situations, but those diagrams, they started to translate into spatial situations. So about the density, we understood that we are not kind of designing buildings in square meters, but we are designing them in cubic meters. So from, let's say, a simple situation of individual houses being one next to another in a generic suburban situations, those can be densified, and even further on in such a way that those boundaries between individual units can start to merge and shape different social interactions in order to kind of have a compact, hyper-attached system, allowing scenarios like that where two neighbors can communicate in a different way with spatial transformation of their wall in between, their boundary. And this kind of led us to the idea of mass customization, of how collective housing can be mass customized. So at the end, we kind of came up with a spatial proposition where some of those spaces were about to be negotiated, or where the spaces where the people who are moving in, they can share them, and they have to kind of reach certain agreements in negotiation. So we designed a web interface. Internet was a very new thing back then, where the society would kind of form first online and then kind of translate into reality. Quite similar to what the social networks are doing today. And you have to take in account that Facebook didn't really exist back then. So in a way, we were just before that. So those social situations were translating into a spatial scenarios. So at the end, the next to the King's Cross, this collective housing neighborhood kind of looked and worked like that, with a set of social situations that were playing out through this through these scenarios of negotiation of boundaries between several units in this neighborhood. Okay, so the second more kind of research part is the Home at Arsenale project. This was a pavilion of Slovenian Pavillion for the Architectural Biennale in 2016 in Venice, where Tina and I were invited to curate it. So Alejandro Aravena invited us to explore the frontiers of architecture. And we understood that if we kind of address housing, that is going to be quite an important, well, housing is defining most of our built environment. So it is important to kind of address housing in order to address the most important aspects of human life as architects. So we decided to answer with research on housing on Aravena's question. So why home? Since the dawn of civilization, the structures of dwelling have constructed predominant part of our built environment and have served to fulfill our most basic needs. but yet they should also go beyond just surviving. They should also kind of provide the conditions for a meaningful life. And of course, the definition of home have continuously been questioned through history and through different cultural settings. But today, when we have the society which is very much information driven and it's characterized by mobility, either this is permanent relocations of people or daily or weekly commuting. In this situation, what is home, we felt needed another kind of questioning or understanding why it's like that. So home today, as we are super connected, can be anywhere. So our question was whether home still needs some kind of tangible or haptical understanding, or home is where your Wi-Fi is. So at the end, we proposed a curated library, so a set of books that would address the notion of home, that we would kind of collect, that we did collect, bought, collect, and kind of exhibited there in the pavilion, including with designing the pavilion itself. So it was about the books, about the collection of the books, the curated collection of the books, and the pavilion itself, where these books were positioned. So let me speak a little bit about the pavilion first, and then I'll go to the books. So we don't have a pavilion. Slovenia is a small country, so we always kind of rent a space, and this was in Arsenale, as you see here, generic space, plastered. But the first thing we wanted to do, we kind of cut out a piece of plaster. We understood there is a window behind, so we kind of brought that window also in. So this is our space. We used the space, like half it was the empty one, and the other half was built with this kind of structure, the pavilion-like structure. And that was the reference of a project of Allison and Peter Smithson, where they did this installation for the patio and pavilion project in '56, where they said that the patio and pavilion represents the fundamental necessity of human habitat. The first necessity of this is for a piece of the world, the patio, and the second necessity is for a closed space, the pavilion. So in a way, this kind of dichotomy, duality, it was kind of embedded in our pavilion as well. So we kind of filled it up with shelves, a generic shelf, like a piece of a wooden shelf that kind of will be continuous coming through the pavilion. And then we started to carve out the spaces from this mass of 3D shelving in order to kind of create accommodation for the books. So the structure at the end looked like that. It was fully wooden. Why? Because Slovenia is very much kind of related to Venice through wood. All of those oaks, pylons where the city on the water is kind of put on, comes from the karst region, which is partly from Slovenia and Dalmatia. It's a big historical kind of connection. But also more than 50% of Slovenia it's covered with forest. So this also speaks about our national position. So the pavilion was like that. And then in the process of collecting the books, we invited a little bit less than 30 professionals, but not only professionals, also in terms of architecture, but also designers, historians, theoreticians, writers, to propose maybe around 15 or 10 book titles, books that would address either the context of from where they are actually coming from their front, or maybe something from their work. And the people who we have been inviting were kind of spread around the world, so we could kind of cover diverse contextual, the diverse cultural backgrounds. So everybody kind of participated. You see the list here with a selection of books that were at the end piled like that. So we kind of went online and to different auctions, and we bought 95% of those titles that were available. So we ended up with a collection, physical collection of almost 300 books in hand that we kind of brought to Venice, and we kind of exhibited those books there. So they were you know, kind of available for browsing through and so on. So very compact and rich curated library. So through the process of 6 months of exhibition in Italy, in Venice, we ran interviews with all of those participants, where we were asking them what is behind those reasons why they have selected this book. So you don't only have the information of the book, but you also have the understanding why these architects and professionals they see the value in this book. So this is being compiled now in the set of interviews, which is still kind of pending to come out in our curated book, the book about the books. But we also organized a set of events. So every week there was an event which kind of invited either student workshops or people who have been participating for conferences to discuss the topics of why home and dwelling is important and what it is. So what is characterizing home and dwelling today. So that's how it looked like. Maybe some of you can remember it if you were there. Where the books were exposed with the covers, so they were kind of communicating with you, so everybody could kind of spend here maybe just a minute to see the structure and the whole thing. But there were also people kind of sitting down and reading through those books, and everybody was kind of got a surprise because it's such a diverse selection of books. It always kind of offered a surprise to everybody, even though they were kind of really knowledgeable people coming in here and engaging with our pavilion. So not just the bookshelves, but also the stage for presentations, discussions, student workshops, but nonetheless a very important place for kids. So we also had quite a few books of those in selection were books for kids, understanding of what defines home through the kids' perspective. So at the end, we wanted to kind of create a pavilion which is following the concept of zero waste. So at the end of the Biennale, we brought the structure, we disassembled the structure, we brought it in, and we reassembled it for another exhibition and showed the books once again. Until it was the books were brought to the Museum of Architecture and Design Ljubljana, where they are available now for everybody to browse. So they are back to the community, and we kind of donated the wood from the pavilion to the Faculty of Architecture, which is going to which used it for equipping one of their experimental classroom. So the list of the books you can find in this website, home@arsenale.org, if you are interested in a little bit more depth. So going to the practice, 3 projects, Brick Neighborhood, New Brdo, and Housing Novo Brdo. Brick Neighborhood, it's a competition we won in 2005. It is in Ljubljana, in the center of our country. It is kind of on the edge of the city, on the area where formerly it used to be a brick producing factory. So they were excavating clay and producing bricks, mostly bricks for building Ljubljana throughout 50s, 60s, 70s, after the Second World War. One important thing to note here is that this competition already had a predefined urban planning. So what you see here is what we have got in the competition brief, and we had to follow the massing of this building, so the layouts of footprints, the heights, the sizes, and it was restricted to, I think, 0.5 meter of tolerance to those lines. So we're not responsible for the urban planning, and that was a bit painful. We kind of engaged in organizing those volumes internally and kind of designing the facade. So that was the limit that we could do. So these pre-described volumes, we understood they were too big for the area. So we went into a process of micro and macro structuring those volumes in order to create something that is more close to the human scale. So the organization of the flats is the slab was thick enough or too thick to have double-sided orientation of the flats. We kind of made the central corridor, but we put the core. We kind of split the core, the elevator and the staircase into two different ends, so we could get some natural lights to each end of the corridor. We try to organize the individual units in such a way that they can be split, or they can kind of compound together. So they can follow up the dynamics of the family if it kind of grows or it kind of shrinks. So people can also kind of split the flat and maybe rent out the other half or similar. What it wasn't asked in the brief for, but we proposed it in the competition, is a common and shared space coming from our research of negotiation by boundary, understanding that the community in collective housing can only be shaped if they have a common space that they can speak about and they can share about and they can negotiate about. So this is what creates community, and we wanted those communities to be working well in our buildings. So we proposed that that maybe for the sake of one extra flat, we should kind of create a communal room where we could do different kind of activities for everybody, and they can understand what they can do with that. So you have here a couple of examples on the right side from Austrian architects, how they were doing that. So the shared space we positioned exactly on the above the entrance. So you could also, with a little balcony or terrace, so you could always kind of communicate with that shared space whenever you were entering and exiting your building. So that's in a way a very generic space, which is open for very different types of uses. And nowadays it's being used for kids' parties, for improvised kindergartens, for community meetings, for yoga classes. So all these things are actually being developed there through this through the life of these buildings. So this kind of macro structuring brought the duality of the facade. One, it's the brick-clad facades, which speaks about the context of the location before, and then those balconies, which are kind of pushed back a little bit, and they provide space for people to kind of live in and occupy in order to kind of show their lives on the facade. Materiality was very important. Mentioned the brick factory, so we wanted to keep this story on. Here are a couple of references. Plečnik again, brick is a very important material for him, or Max Fabiani, another historical brick building, or even Edvard Travnikar I was showing at the beginning, where brick was one of the key elements for his expression of building continuity. The corner is never kind of finished, it always kind of continues into space. So we went into understanding how we can use typical bricks. This is, the housing is it's a very inexpensive housing, so we didn't have the budget to use custom bricks, but the bricks that are just kind of off the shelf, but how we can create different textures that work in different scales, so from far away to closer, to understand all the detailing, how those things are put together in order to create this little textures on the facade. This is the picture from the building site. You see that the clay, the ground on which these buildings are sitting, it is that clay of those bricks that they were produced, which are also chromatically the same, again, to speak about the past of the location, that kind of translated in this building in that way. So it works differently from different distances, so you can always understand a texture on a different level, and that's it. So the next project, it's again on the same location. So that's another competition that we won 10 years later from the previous one, but with a huge difference. So here the brief didn't have a predefined urban planning, and it was a two-stage competition. So it was our job to define first the urban layout, the massing, and then in the second stage to kind of define the architecture and the structure of the dwelling units. So it is pretty big site. It is 500 flats, and we distribute it in such a way that it's kind of a pixelated with the small buildings that kind of occupy the site in a certain structural way. So we identified 5 levels of community creation or community identification. So first one is the whole area, including these 500 units, that you can identify yourself with the neighborhood. The second is the street, the walking street, so without the traffic, which all the entrances of the buildings are being oriented to. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 subunits, sub-streets, small neighborhoods. So that's the second layer. The third layer is your own block where you are living, so the building. The fourth level, it is your unit where you're living together with your small, well, nuclear family or community that you're living together. So the basic unit. And then the fifth level is your own room where you have the ultimate privacy. So in that way, the building has this kind of, it's socially structured. So you always have a certain scale of identification with your community, which translates in this kind of spatial arrangement. And it looks like that. So we have proposed 3 types of block buildings and Z buildings at the end. So it's kind of, it has a different edge condition towards the road. So it has a different typology in order to kind of distribute the structure of units that the client wanted. So that's the type S. It is always a central core and corridor to be as compact as possible for circulation, and then the dwelling units around, which allows for the corner units quite often that can offer quite a good light conditions and the views you can share. So the M type with a little bit bigger core with some atrium, and the large type, the L type, which has an atrium inside with a big space that can be appropriated through time for different uses of the community. Maybe one more thing to stress here is that when we were studying at the AA through this project Negotiate My Boundary, we read Luhmann, a German sociologist, who was stating that the community can only happen in a certain scale of people living together. So up to, let's say, 30, 35 flats being part of one building still can generate community. You cannot imagine community being generated in a skyscraper where you have like 100, 150 units. That's why we kind of structure this project in individual buildings that are small enough in order to kind of have this under 35 units size, so the communities have a chance to be created. So again, what was in a way very important, and this time the client, which is the same client, Slovenian National Housing Fund, as the previous competition, understood that shared spaces are important. So they already put it into the brief. So they asked for shared spaces. So we proposed shared spaces now in a little bit different situation. So we put them in the ground floor next to the entrance. So the shared space of each of these buildings can work twofold. So it has an entrance from the inside of the building that it's kind of meant for the people who are living in the building, but it also has the entrance from the street. And that kind of opens a new possibility for this space not to be only kind of a social space for the community, but it can also be a transitional space or communication space with the public. So they can start running here also some public events or maybe even slightly commercial events in order to kind of sustain their communal budget. So this is how it looks being built. It's been built for 2 years. So those are pictures where people haven't moved in yet. Now it's kind of a little bit more lively. So this kind of street where the buildings are oriented with the entrance. And here you see the big window of the shared space and the entrance to the shared space that the building uses as a community space, but it also kind of projects to the public space of what they are doing in there. The whole layout, it's kind of on a checkered layout. So each facade always has an empty space in front. So all of those spaces in between, even maybe more important than the buildings themselves, they are equipped with greenery and playgrounds for children, but most importantly also that the parkings which are underground, they are not occupying the whole surface of the plot, but some of those spaces in between the buildings, the courtyards, they don't have parkings underneath. So it allowed us to bring there big trees already that are going to grow and actually kind of create a park situation, not just kind of a grass type of greenery, but really 3D volume of green, which is very important for housing. So here you have a pump track with one of those streets ending up in a nature with this kind of sitting area here. So the outside public spaces are very, very important for the community to actually work together. Okay, so the last example of collective housing is Housing Perovo, which is a little bit different. This was commercial development in the Alpine part of Slovenia, where recently was kind of hit with a lot of flooding. So that was for the buildings, very heavy on the buildings who are next to the river. We are a little bit more up. So it's a small Alpine Slovenian town with the plot here on the already kind of going up hills with a view to this town. So what you see from here, from this situation, is quite a lot of greenery. So here you see this kind of representation of green heart of Europe being Slovenia, and the Alpine situation in the back. So in that sense, the context here, it's quite different than, for example, in Ljubljana. We have kind of created this little development there in such a way that offers the views to these mountains, but at the same time it creates the facade from, or let's say it is an image from the little town as well. So with this sharp, very steep roofs, we kind of created this kind of alpine typology that when you are down in the valley and you look up, you kind of see the tips of the roofs coming out. So it's kind of an announcement of a neighborhood, but you don't see, I mean, you don't kind of compromise the privacy of people who are living there. So it was already a predefined set of parcels of lots, but we distributed those houses as the upper row as twins and the lower row as individual houses. So the twins always have the view in between the individual houses to this mountain scenery. And then further on, we proposed different smaller type of houses in order to kind of dissolve the density towards the view. As those lots are really, really small and really close together, so it's in a way a typical suburban situations, we thought about offering a little bit of privacy to each of the people living here. So the twin house, it's not two identical units, but the two units are slightly different. So each one of those, they can have their own basic orientation from their living quarters to the garden. In a different way. So they are not kind of just over each other, but they have a little bit of privacy. So the volume was, and the typology of single slanted steep roof was already predefined by the urban regulations. So we kind of developed this section of 3 stories, where in the top you have some kind of gallery. So the basic living is in the ground floor, very traditional, sleeping in the first floor, and then the third floor, extras, hobbies, and so on. But we also, as the volumes are relatively tall, we divided in a material way the volumes in 2 parts: the base, which is the ground floor, which is plastered, and then the upper floor clad with wood, where kind of these wooden volumes kind of identify the neighborhood, and it seems like it's smaller than actually it is. So you have these images of the driveway, like suburban situations. You drive in, you have an entrance, and then you have rooms above. So some of the rooms, they have little balconies, but always in a corner, and then in between. So these rooms are for the kids' rooms, so they are kind of centered, oriented in the middle of this development. So the kids are maybe more social, so they can start communicating with each other. The bedrooms, the master bedrooms, are on the outside, on the other side of the situation. So materiality, snow holders, because here during the winters there is quite a lot of snow, and the interior, which kind of doubles the materiality. As I mean, alpine area, it is pretty much kind of related to building with wood. That's why wooden cladding on the outside, but also wooden on the inside. But in a commercial housing project, you don't know who's gonna live here. So the only element which is kind of designed and defined is the staircase. The rest is left as open as possible for different lifestyles to unfold in these buildings. Okay, so that's about collective housing. Now I'd like to share with you an attempt of understanding how an individual house can also start to be a collective understanding. So obviously, when you do individual houses, you always think about, you always communicate with, let's say, one client or a small group of people. And those users are pretty much defined, and it's always bespoke solution made for those people. But the question here is how everybody can have an opportunity to have a house which is designed by architects, like an architectural ambitious house, but you can reach a larger amount of people. So we were addressing this question in our project XH System House. It's an open source project, which I would like to show you now. So, but before we go into that one, I'll just show you 3 of our individual houses in parallel that we have published in this book, Home by Dekleva Gregorič Architects, in 2016. And this is just a couple of slides of 3 individual buildings that are on 3 completely different situations for 3 completely different clients, obviously. Just as a diagram or an attempt to show how an individual house, which is maybe seemingly very similar program, everybody needs a living room, sleeping room, and so on, but due to different contextual situations, they have different context, and due to different people, they are completely different architectures. So the chimney house on the left, the compact karst in the middle, and the cliff top house on Maui, on Hawaii, on the right. I mean, you might be aware of the big fires on Maui. That's an enormous disaster. Lahaina, it's gone. So that's very sad for Maui. But I mean, this is on the other side. Our building is on the other side, so it wasn't affected. But we were still pretty much emotional with those situations there. Okay, so firstly, the contexts are completely different. On one hand side, you have maybe a compact situation of a traditional village. On the other side, on Maui, you have you know, just nature, just 50% of blue and 50% of green. The ocean and the hill, and in that sense, the context defines the building in a completely different way. But also the references that are part of those contexts are completely different. So for chimney house, it was this barn. For the compact karst house, you see here a typical traditional karst house, which is built exclusively only out of stones. You remember all the oak trees went to Venice. And here, the Frank Lloyd Wright Walker house in California, which is part of the context of the ocean, it's something completely different as an input that we've got from clients. So in that sense, the materiality is completely different as well, how it integrates. So the chimney house kind of speaks with that barn. The compact karst house is a compact stony house, and the cliff top house in Maui, it's clad with ipe wood, which kind of attained the same chromatics as all the cliffs here through time. So the communication with inside and the outside, it is always there, but it's always in a different way because it relates to different out-the-door settings. And the same way, the interiors are completely different things because they are responding to different clients. So the chimney house, as it speaks, the chimney, it's kind of related to the big kitchen where they are cooking all the time. The compact karst house, it has this kind of compact idea of living inside with a house within a house. And the cliff top my house, it's kind of a fluid space that actually goes from the inside to the outside around the volumes, which provide some privacy for sleeping. Materiality in the same way defines the appearance of the building. And at the end here you have the picture of the people who have influenced this building, that they are as they are, and they are now kind of using them as an extension practically of their bodies and minds. So how to bring this diversity, this kind of understanding of differences into individual house that is maybe available for everybody. So that's the XH System House, an open source project. We are giving it to public under the Creative Commons. So we understood we need a very flexible system. So system which is kind of composed by units, and it can grow or shrink, and it can be customizable to different contexts or to different user needs. So you can have different different number of units. You can have different type of windows, maybe even recycled ones. You have different pitches of roofs. Mediterranean, for example, just to address here around, it has a different inclination as opposed to the Alpine typology. You can customize the cladding and so on. So either you have a small unit, or you add 2 units house, or maybe you have 3 units house, or even larger unit or more. But the main point is the basic unit, where the structure is always the same, but you can we have developed 3 different types of cores. One is a large core in the middle, the other one is a smaller core or the medium core, which is then maybe added with some storage on the sides. And the core, the unit without the core, that actually maybe it's just like a small kind of service program in the integrated into the wall. So these units can be done in a different stage. So it's maybe fully clad, or just kind of a covered loggia, or maybe pergola. And in the matter of how many units you can kind of attached to the whole system, here you have different possibilities. We kind of created a matrix that can go in an infinity in a way, theoretically, but it can provide for different scenarios. So in order to understand that the project works, we kind of created quite a few scenarios with disposition of furniture, understanding all these 3 typology of units. And we also understood how those elements can be customizable. So Mediterranean pitch of roof, continental or Alpine. You can clad it with timber. You can maybe just use plywood panels, maybe reclaimed plywood panels, or reclaimed corrugated metal sheets. So the idea, or the important thing, is that there is this one system that could answer to the needs of very diverse situation of people. So again, a diagram of what kind of scenarios of people can actually happen in order to understand the diversity, and the translation of that of these communities that can be either for a small family, or maybe even individual, to maybe a family-run bed and breakfast. So in order, again, to understand how this works, we again ran a couple of scenarios, just kind of make projects to see how it works. From let's say a small unit, 1 unit house, which is maybe for 1, 2, or 3 people. It has 1 bedroom or maybe 2 bedrooms. It can be well. It offers a couple of scenarios. For example, a small nature retreat in somewhere in Mediterranean, or maybe a unit with a small core, which is a little bit more kind of open. It's more maybe as an artist studio, and you put it on the rooftops on one of the world's metropolis. Or maybe 2 unit example with 1 bedroom, or another one on the top of the core, where you could see it clad with clay tiles, and it's part of I don't know, a village in Toscana. 3 unit type, maybe an alpine retreat, a winter house, or maybe a atrium typology of a building that kind of has this pergola. It's something that you can have in the woods, or even further on with a bigger situation. So what we've done at the end of this project, we actually created a full set of execution plans, which you see here. So all the detailings, everything is kind of drawn in detail and defined, calculated with structure. So there is like a full set of construction drawings that are available for everybody. So we have this on the website, and you can kind of request you've kind of fill in the form. So we have been sending this to so many people around the world. So we will kind of fill out the form to understanding what is their initial needs, and we send them out the whole project, so they can either appropriate it, they can build it, and so on and so on. So we are still awaiting feedback of some of those to be built or reappropriated. So it's going to be a long-term project to see how this develops. So to conclude, in housing, in collective housing, we have to accept change. Social situations are continuously changing entities. So in a way, we have to somehow accept change in what we do. So here I'd like to show you this image, a modern, already a criticism to modernism. It was like 50s, Candilis, Josic, and Woods, a housing for Morocco in Casablanca, that they kind of thought it should be like that. But a few years later, it was appropriated in a completely different situation. So I think we have to keep in mind that these things are alive and they happen like that. And in relation to that, I'd like to point out this book, How Buildings Learn, from Stuart Brand, where he says that architecture we imagine is permanent, and so are buildings toward us, because they discount time, they misuse time. So building in time, it is important thinking when we're designing architecture. And Stuart Brand also drew and said the following thing: all buildings are predictions, and all predictions are wrong. So this diagram of layers, how they are permanent or unpermanent, I think we have to keep in mind when we design those buildings. So they are going to be kind of sustainable in time, to sustainable in terms of catering different human needs of the people that are occupying them. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm really happy I could share this with you, and I look forward if we could see each other live, Georgia, in any other opportunities in the future. So thank you very much. Yeah, thanks, Georgia. Stop sharing, and this is the end of this recording. Thanks.